Poet Lucille Clifton says, "We cannot create what we can't imagine." There are ideas everywhere, she says. Everything is possible if you pay attention, if you hear what you listen to, if you see what you're looking at. When I think about imagination, I think about letting go of what I know and surrendering to what might be. In my body, I feel both an increase in energy and also an increase in anxiety. Imagination to me feels full of potential and also full of risk. To imagine, you have to let go of habits and assumptions. To imagine is to be open to possibility, to step off of the well-worn path. And like anything else, imagination takes practice. Children are great teachers if you are looking for a guide. I was raised by imaginative parents. Just before my 3rd birthday, my parents moved our family to a non-working 16-acre farm on the north shore of Long Island, about 60 miles east of New York City. The farm had been a homestead for more than 200 years, a part of Europe's colonization of North America, and prior to that, the land had been indigenous land stretching back hundreds, even thousands of years before those first European colonizers arrived. It was a long rectangular piece of land that climbed gradually uphill from the street. The farmhouse sitting in a hollow close to the road. And from the back door of the house today, you can look all the way up to the woods that edge the property's far boundary. In 1977, though, you couldn't even see the huge Dutch-style barn perched just about 100 yards behind the house. The property was like Sleeping Beauty's castle, my parents would say. The farm was owned by a woman named Mrs. Bryant, whose husband had died years earlier. They had raised 4 sons on this farm, and each of them had moved away. By the time my parents came to look at the property, she was living in just a few of the rooms in the old farmhouse. It was quite run down, and the farm itself had been shuttered and was not so slowly being reclaimed by saplings and brambles and vines. My parents describe walking up the hill, blazing a trail all the way to the wooded area at the back of the property where they came upon an incredible 300-year-old white oak tree. And from that vantage point, looking down the hill toward where they'd started, apparently they made a decision to take a leap of faith. They named the farm Potential, because that is what they felt as they stepped out of their comfort zone into what they could only imagine might be ahead. On that first day, I don't know if they imagined anything close to what eventually came to be. I don't think they envisioned that one of my father's high school students would hang a rope swing in that old oak tree a few years later, from which my 3 brothers and I would soar through the air for countless hours of my childhood. I don't think they imagined raising farm animals, or the strawberry fields they would plant, or building a thriving education-based business on that farm, or even harvesting the garden's bounty exactly. I think they just saw potential, an opportunity to imagine their own lives from scratch, space for their children to run around. And they went for it, despite the fact that the labor and sacrifice of that commitment was very apparent, despite the fact that neither of them knew a thing about farming or about restoring old barns, or even how to clear acres of overgrowth from a neglected piece of land. They were an educated young white couple, teachers with graduate degrees, and supportive middle-class parents, which meant they had grown up in a country that told them in all kinds of direct and indirect ways that they could make anything happen if they worked at it. That was enough of a safety net beneath them. And so they poured every penny that they had into a down payment and signed a 30-year mortgage they could barely afford. For many years, they skipped most luxuries. We didn't take many vacations. My mom made most of our clothes when I was a kid. We ate on a budget, almost never ate out. Our entertainment was that farm, the swing in the woods, the trails we would blaze through the brush, tree forts, and racing big wheels down the hill, pretending to be teenagers, and sledding and playing with chickens and goats. It was a great place to practice imagination. It was a great example of what can come from surrendering to potential, of how brave and bold people can be when they are cared for, when their country sees their value. It was decidedly not the most comfortable path they could have chosen or the easiest, but it was certainly a rewarding one. And I really do believe that growing up that way has a lot to do with why I am who I am. My parents modeled for me what it looks like to see the potential of something, and they modeled how to work toward making it real. That was a gift, I think, but a complicated gift, to be sure. I have known that story about buying the farm for as long as I can remember. But until recently, I had not thought about the fact that all the overgrowth back then, everything that obstructed the view, that covered the land in mystery, all of that was essential to what came next in my family's story. I had always thought about that rundown house and the wild growth as being extra hurdles that my mom and dad admirably overlooked when they decided to buy the farm. But now, I think perhaps those things were exactly what allowed them to imagine the potential in front of them. If the farm hadn't been in the state it was in, I wonder, would there have been as much opportunity for them to imagine themselves in it? What if this year has been a year where brambles have grown up over some of what was? What if this year, by leaving spaces empty, by retreating from one another in so many ways, we have a unique opportunity to imagine something new, to be more intentional as we step into the year, into the months ahead? I do not mean to disregard the grief of this past year or the continued struggle in the months coming. There is really no conversation to be had about the new year without naming the deep tragedy of the moment, of this moment in time. A tragedy that is still unfolding. COVID has been cruel, and it has magnified many of the ways we as a country have been failing so many of our people for so long. More than 340,000 people in the US have already died from COVID. And this year has also underscored the cost of an economy that does not provide basic social safety nets for its people. Things like childcare, healthcare, and a living wage. In 2019, before COVID, the Fed reported that 4 in 10 Americans didn't have enough cash in their bank accounts to cover a $400 unexpected expense. Then COVID hit. And in the first few months of 2020, just the first few months, 40 million Americans found themselves unemployed due to COVID-19. This year has been devastating for so many people. And yet, those with substantial stock portfolios did pretty well this year. The market bounced back from a hit in March and has had record gains since then. Billionaires of the world added $1.9 trillion to their bank accounts in the most recent article I read. To try to help you wrap your head around what that looks like, Elon Musk, one person in 1 year, went from having a personal net worth of $27 billion to $137 billion in 1 year. Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, he is personally now worth about $182 billion. He added approximately $7.6 million a day to his personal net worth in the year 2020. $7.6 million a day. The guy who owns Zoom is about $8 billion richer. I think he earned something like $22 million a day in 2020. And yes, these men run companies that are providing valuable services, sure. I am very thankful for the Zoom platform this year. I think it's bittersweet. But something is wrong when we allow profits to be distributed in such egregiously imbalanced ways, when that kind of greed is seen as admirable even. A person in an Amazon warehouse packing up and shipping an order, that person needs a living wage too. They should be able to pay their bills, save for retirement, see a doctor. Their children should have access to high quality education. Their parents should be well cared for. They are not disposable or less entitled to thrive. Neither is the factory worker making the products, likely somewhere overseas. Neither are the many communities of people for whom COVID is a particular risk and whose lives have not been protected sufficiently this year. Indigenous people, people of color, our elders. Our collective imagination can envision a better future, one that takes better care of life on this planet. That was true before 2020, but perhaps it is all the more true now. Maybe the fact that we have so readily recognized what is meant by essential workers this year, maybe that means we will be less dismissive of those very people being underpaid and insufficiently protected. Maybe, as was the case after the 1918 pandemic, this experience will birth a new age of progressive advancements, a shift toward prioritizing people and planet over profit and plunder. We need to have hard conversations, and we need to stand up to powerful people and powerfully destructive mythologies. We, and by we, I mean those of us with a little safety net beneath us, have to start choosing the less comfortable path, choosing the one that serves our collective best interest over the ones that may feel familiar and less risky, but maintain the status quo. The more any one of us has, the more we need to fight for those who do not, those who are still being misused. We need to learn to see our power and to use our power to make real and lasting change, to imagine a different world. And the months ahead of us in this particular year, they are significant. We will look back on this story in our lives. We will marvel at the clarity of it all. We may not even remember how muddy it felt when we were living through it, how hard it was to balance all the challenges, to connect with one another, to navigate loneliness and isolation and exhaustion and helplessness and illness and fear and all of the million different realities of this time. But even if the details fade, this moment in history will remain significant, and we have the opportunity to build the future. I think we will remember the creativity and the incredible inventiveness that has been a part of this year. we've had some solid practice at imagination already. We've jumped into the deep end of discomfort, figured out new technology, found ways to tell our loved ones how much they mean to us across miles and months of separation. We have celebrated birthdays in car parades and video journals. We've mourned loved ones in virtual memorial services. We've stood in driveways, sent letters, left care packages on doorsteps, asked for help when we were struggling to make it through a day. We've donated money, accepted donations. We've let ourselves be cared for, and we've cared for one another. What has surprised you this past year? What have you learned? What has become less important? What has been missing? Who has been missing? When we began our worship this morning, you were invited to think of something that you wanted to let go of, something you do not wish to carry into 2021. Now, as we move into the year ahead, how will you continue to reach out in the months to come? What will you ask of yourselves? What do you need from others? Which pieces of life before should be left to grow wild? What is the work in front of you? And how can we, our church community, help hold each other accountable and help hold each other up? How can we be a laboratory for practicing imagination? I can't wait to see our version of that swing in the woods. I can't wait to soar through the air with all of you. Happy New Year.